These are not just stories to spook you. They're real events that will send shivers down your spine. Turn down the lights, grab a blanket, and prepare yourself for 3 scary, real Christmas stories that will chill your blood. Are you ready to uncover the dark secrets of the holiday season? After a 2-year relationship came to an end, I found myself adjusting to life on my own again. Single, swiping, and stumbling through the chaotic world of online dating. Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, you name it, I was on it. A few months had passed since the breakup, and I'd met a handful of people during that time, but nothing stuck. Then one day I matched with a girl named Tracy on Tinder. She gave me her Snapchat, and I thought, why not? But before I knew it, our connection fizzled into nothing more than her occasionally watching my stories without saying a word. That kind of thing used to feel normal back in my college days, when casual connections and fleeting encounters were just part of the culture. Back then, weekend parties were practically a ritual. Dimly lit dorm rooms, red Solo cups, and music so loud it made your chest vibrate. Hookups were the norm, not the exception, and the unspoken rule was to avoid anything too serious. Everyone was too busy, living their best life to think about tomorrow. It felt exciting at the time, even liberating. But looking back now, I can't help but wonder, was it all just a way to distract ourselves from how little we really knew about connection or love? Fast forward to now, in my late 20s, and the thrill of swiping on Tinder feels oddly similar to those college parties. The surface-level interactions, the small talk that leads nowhere, and the endless cycle of chasing validation. It's all there, but it's lost its spark. What once seemed carefree now feels hollow. Anyway, for context, I own a corner townhome in a quiet little community, and I'm an accountant. It's good money, but let's be real. It's soul-crushingly boring. After my ex moved out, I thought I'd enjoy the peace and quiet. But after just a month, the novelty wore off. Turns out I'm not as much of a lone wolf as I thought. Maybe I'm just wired for relationships, or maybe I just need human connection. But the silence started to get to me. So, there I was, swiping on dating apps and setting up dates. Not because I was desperate for love, but because I needed a reason to get out of the house. It was last December, right in the middle of the holiday season. I had posted something casual on my Snapchat story, just a little Christmas-related post. Out of nowhere, Tracy, that girl I hadn't talked to in weeks, popped up in my DMs. She commented on the story, and before I knew it, we were chatting again. She brought up the idea of doing something Christmas-themed together, and I thought, why not? I threw out a few festive suggestions. Ice skating, walking through the village to admire the twinkling decorations, or maybe visiting one of those over-the-top houses with synchronized light displays. But she surprised me by suggesting something a little more intimate, decorating my Christmas tree. Now, I did have a tree, but it was a fake one stashed up in my attic. I told her it wasn't set up yet because honestly, hauling it down is a 2-person job. She didn't hesitate for a second before offering to help. That caught me off guard, but I figured, why not? The thought of pulling out the dusty ornaments and untangling strings of lights with someone I barely knew had an oddly charming appeal. I started imagining how the night might play out. Maybe we'd find an old, forgotten ornament buried in the box, sparking some random story or laughter. There's something special about Christmas decorations. They're little time capsules, holding memories you didn't even know you cherished. So I told her to come over around 9. By then it would already be dark, and the idea of decorating a tree with Tracy had this strangely exciting vibe to it. It was probably around 7:30 when we finalized the plan. I remember glancing at the clock and realizing I needed to prepare. I grabbed my keys and rushed out the door, heading straight to the liquor store to pick up a couple of bottles of wine. I thought, if we're going to do this, we might as well do it right. When I got back to the house, I went into full cleaning mode, vacuuming, sweeping, and tidying up like a man on a mission. It hit me just how quickly a place can get messy when you're the only one responsible for it. My ex used to handle most of the cleaning, and let me tell you, her absence was noticeable in more ways than one. By the time 9 p.m. rolled around, I was sitting on the couch, trying to play it cool. The TV was on, and I acted like I was deeply engrossed in whatever random movie was playing. In reality, I was sitting upright, fidgeting, waiting for Tracy to show up. I'd set the scene to feel cozy and inviting. Soft lighting, wine on standby, the works. But as the minutes ticked by, I started to wonder if she was going to flake. I even sent a quick follow-up text. Let me know when you're on your way. For a while, there was no response. and my doubts started creeping in. By 9:30, I was convinced she wasn't coming. Then, finally, my phone buzzed. "I'm outside," she said. I opened the door, and let me tell you, my first impression was unexpected. She walked in, and I immediately noticed I had to look up at her. I'm 5'10", so for her to be taller, she had to be at least 6 feet. That threw me off a bit, but not as much as the overwhelming scent of perfume that followed her, like she'd bathed in it. We moved to the couch, and things got even more surprising. She sat down right next to me, so close that our legs were touching. I wasn't sure what to make of it. On one hand, it felt almost too forward. On the other, it was kind of intriguing. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was feeling. Was it excitement? Unease? A mix of both? Whatever it was, I wasn't expecting the night to start off quite like this. She didn't look quite like her pictures. She seemed older, maybe a little more worn, but it's hard to put into words. And while the overpowering cloud of cheap perfume hit me first, there was something faint underneath it that wasn't exactly pleasant. A subtle hint of body odor. And yeah, it completely threw me off. Still, I tried to stay polite. "Want some wine?" I asked. And she eagerly replied, "Yes, please." So I headed to the kitchen to pour a couple of glasses, making small talk along the way. You ever meet someone in person after weeks of texting or DMing, only to realize they're nothing like the version of them you'd built in your head? That was this moment. Exactly. Something about her felt off. She seemed to miss basic social cues, like the natural rhythm of a conversation just wasn't clicking for her. But I brushed it off and handed her a glass of Merlot. We clinked glasses, and I tried to shift into a more relaxed vibe. And then it happened. I kid you not, she managed to spill a huge drop of red wine right onto my light blue couch. For a split second, my brain short-circuited. Internally, I was screaming, but on the outside, I forced a calm, "It's okay." I bolted to the kitchen, grabbed a damp paper towel and a sponge, and rushed back to the couch, hoping to save it before the stain set in. As I frantically blotted the fabric, she kept apologizing over and over. I kept telling her it was fine, but deep down I was already imagining how much it was going to cost to fix, or worse, replace, the couch. This wasn't exactly how I pictured the night going. After the little mishap, the tension in the air was hard to ignore. Wanting to break it, I suggested we get the tree out of the attic. Climbing up the creaky pull-down ladder, I couldn't help but feel that familiar chill the attic always seemed to have, no matter the season. The dim, flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling barely illuminated the space, casting long shadows over the forgotten boxes and random clutter piled high. It was the kind of place that felt frozen in time, holding years of odds and ends that no longer had a place in the house but were too sentimental to throw away. I pushed aside a stack of old suitcases and a broken chair to slide over the oversized box, holding the tree parts. As I handed the pieces down to Tracy, I noticed how eerily quiet it was up there. Each piece seemed heavier than I remembered, and by the time I reached the largest section, the one I definitely couldn't manage down the ladder alone, I hesitated. Tracy took it with ease, reminding me again just how tall and strong she was. With everything finally down, I climbed back to the living room, shaking off the strange vibe the attic always gave me. Together, we started assembling the tree. The atmosphere softened as Christmas music played in the background, and I poured us both another glass of wine. There's something about wine that can make even the tensest situations feel lighter, and I was grateful for it. With the tree standing tall, its lights glowing softly, it was time to move on to the ornaments. I told Tracy they were stored in the crawl space, explaining that they weren't just decorations, they were pieces of my childhood, handed down by my parents and packed away in bins that felt more like treasure chests filled with memories. I headed to the crawl space, leaving Tracy in the living room to relax. As I crouched in the cramped, dimly lit space and started pulling out the bins, a wave of dizziness hit me. At first, I chalked it up to the wine, but as my head grew heavier and my balance wavered, I couldn't shake the strange feeling that something was off. The attic, the crawl space, the night itself, it all felt different, like the house was holding its breath. Leaning against the wall, I tried to steady myself, my mind racing with questions. Was it really just the wine? Or was there something else lurking in the shadows of this night? I've never been much of a heavy drinker, so my tolerance is embarrassingly low. Still, I hadn't had that much to drink to be feeling the way I was. My head felt heavy, my thoughts sluggish. Ignoring it, I grabbed the first bin of ornaments and started hauling it upstairs. By the time I reached the top, I noticed something strange. Tracy was nowhere to be found. At first, I figured she must be in the bathroom. I called her name, expecting a casual reply, but there was only silence. Confused, I checked the bathroom, but it was empty. I scratched my head, trying to piece it together, and kept calling her name as I walked through the house. Nothing. Feeling uneasy, I pulled out my phone to message her on Snapchat. My snap showed as delivered, but it hadn't been opened. I started checking every room, even the 2 bedrooms, but she was just gone. Completely gone. I couldn't believe it. Did she sneak out on me? My mind spiraled with self-doubt. Did she think I was weird, ugly, or just boring? The irony wasn't lost on me. I wasn't even that into her to begin with, yet I still felt the sting of being ghosted in the most literal sense. Frustrated and a little dazed, I crashed onto the couch, which suddenly felt way more comfortable than I remembered. Honestly, I don't know how much time passed after that. I kept periodically checking my phone to see if she'd opened my snap, but she never did. At some point, I just gave up and let the TV in the background fill the silence. Then everything went black. Not in the figurative sense. I mean, my memory literally went black. One moment I was on the couch, and the next there was nothing. And then I woke up surrounded by complete darkness. No lights, no glow from the TV, just pitch black. I blinked, trying to orient myself, but the room felt unfamiliar in the absence of light. My body felt off, weak, almost paralyzed. It was as if my limbs had been weighed down, sluggish and hard to move. Somehow, I managed to fumble around until my fingers brushed against my phone, tucked just beneath me. I picked it up and pressed the screen, checking the time. The second the screen lit up, I froze. The bright glow from my phone didn't just light up the space around me. It outlined the silhouette of someone tall, standing just a few feet in front of me. My heart pounded in my chest, but for reasons I can't explain, I didn't scream. Instead, I slowly placed the phone back down, plunging the room back into darkness. A strange calm came over me as I opened my mouth to speak. "Tracy?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. I hoped, prayed even, that it was her, though in that moment my memory was hazy, and I couldn't piece together how the night had gone. The figure didn't respond, just silence. Dread started clawing its way up my spine, but I needed to know. With trembling hands, I picked up my phone again, this time turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness and landed on Tracy. It was her, standing right in front of me, her eyes locked onto mine. But something was wrong. She wasn't moving. She wasn't speaking. She was just staring down at me, her expression unreadable. I felt glued to the couch, unable to move. I couldn't tell if it was the sheer weight of fear pinning me down, or the effects of whatever she had clearly laced my drink with. My mind raced, but my body refused to respond. This wasn't the night I'd imagined. This was something else entirely, something I didn't understand. I could barely move. My limbs felt heavy, weak, like they didn't belong to me anymore. Helpless and dazed, the only thing I managed to say was, "Tracy?" My voice was hoarse, barely audible. She didn't respond. Instead, I saw her turn toward the stairs, and in a blur, she sprinted down them. The sound of her heavy, frantic footsteps echoed disturbingly, each stomp amplifying the panic rising in my chest. A loud slam followed from downstairs, probably the front door. In those first few minutes after waking, everything felt surreal. My vision was fuzzy, and the sounds around me seemed warped, like I was stuck in a bad dream. But with each passing moment, my head started to clear, and I slowly regained control of my body. Moving became easier. Still shaken, I grabbed my phone and checked Snapchat. Her account was gone. She blocked me. I stumbled over to the window, peeking outside, hoping to catch some clue of what had just happened. But there was nothing. No car in sight, just my own and the neighbors'. That's when it hit me. I never saw how she arrived. I didn't hear a car, and I had no idea if she even came in one. Trying to steady myself, I started checking the house from top to bottom, frantically searching for anything she might have taken. The idea of being drugged and robbed by someone I barely knew sent waves of anger and humiliation through me. But as I searched, the missing items I uncovered felt strange. Not cash, not electronics. Every last bottle of pills in my house was gone. At first it didn't make sense, but the more I thought about it, the more it did. All my vitamins and supplements were gone. Every single bottle. But the real shock was the Adderall and the Oxy. Adderall, prescribed for my focus and productivity, was something I rarely talked about. It's a medication that people often associate with students pulling all-nighters or professionals trying to squeeze every ounce of efficiency from their day. But in the wrong hands, it's something entirely different, highly sought after, addictive, and often sold on the black market. And then there was the Oxy, prescribed after surgery and barely touched. The thing about Oxy is its reputation. It's not just a painkiller, it's part of the opioid epidemic. Seeing those two medications missing left me uneasy, not just because of their value, but because they hinted at someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. As if that wasn't unsettling enough, a bottle of vodka was also missing from the mini fridge in my room. Beyond those things, nothing else seemed out of place or stolen, but the combination of what was taken sent chills down my spine. Without hesitation, I called the police to report the robbery. I explained everything, how I only knew her through Snapchat, how I didn't have her number, and how the only identity I had for her was the name she gave me, Tracy Gibson. The officers arrived quickly and, much to my embarrassment, started knocking on my neighbor's door. Our homes are connected, and even though it was close to 1 a.m., they wanted to see if he'd noticed anything unusual. I stood awkwardly beside them as my neighbor, groggy and clearly annoyed, opened the door. When asked, he said he hadn't heard or seen anything strange. He'd been asleep the whole time. The police didn't seem too optimistic but stayed for about 20 minutes, taking notes and looking around. Once they left, I double-checked that all my keys were accounted for, just to make sure she couldn't somehow let herself back in. But other than that, there was nothing left to do. Tracy, or whoever she really was, had vanished without a trace. And as the quiet of the night settled back over the house, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that this was far from over. From the moment I met her, something about her felt off. And looking back now, everything makes sense. I'm not even calling this a theory. I'm certain it's the truth. That woman wasn't who she claimed to be. I'm convinced she was older than she let on, possibly homeless and struggling with a serious drug addiction. The overwhelming cloud of perfume she wore, it had to be an attempt to cover up the unmistakable body odor that still managed to seep through. She must have laced my wine while I was in the attic. It's the only explanation. I don't know how long I was out, but it was clearly enough time for her to comb through my entire home, hunting down anything resembling drugs or supplements. That image of her standing over me, her tall silhouette looming in the faint glow of my phone screen as I lay helpless on the couch, is something I can't shake. It's burned into my memory in the worst way. After that night, I couldn't even bring myself to finish decorating the tree. The whole experience had drained any trace of holiday spirit I had left. This happened on Christmas Eve back in 1997, when I was just 7 years old. Since we're Jewish, Christmas wasn't something we celebrated, so the night felt like any other to us. Our dad, a doctor, was on call at the hospital as he always volunteered to work during the Christmas holidays. It was his way of letting his Christian colleagues spend time with their families. That meant he wasn't home that night. It was just my little sister and me left to ourselves for the evening. Technically, our mom was home too, but to be honest, she wasn't much of a presence. She was an alcoholic, though I didn't understand that back then. At 7 years old, I didn't know what alcoholism was. All I knew was that once it got dark, Mom would always pass out, and waking her up was nearly impossible. I know this might sound harsh or like too much information, but it's important to the story. That night, my sister and I were curled up downstairs watching TV, trying to make the house feel less empty. Then we heard it, a knock at the door. Not just a single knock either. Knock, 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 knock. It was loud enough to cut through the sound of the TV and make my sister and me look at each other nervously. Being the oldest, I felt it was my job to check it out. I got up and walked to the door, my heart pounding just a little faster than usual. Our front door had glass panes, the kind with frosted designs, so it wasn't hard to make out the shadowy figure standing on the other side. There was a man standing outside, dressed in a Santa suit, holding a large bag slung over his shoulder. When he saw me, his face lit up in a wide smile and he waved for me to come closer. "Hey kid," he called out. "It's me, Santa. Let me in and I'll give you your presents." I hesitated, stepping closer to the door but keeping it firmly shut. Something about it felt off. Why would Santa, if he were real, come to our house? Of all houses in the neighborhood, we didn't celebrate Christmas. The whole situation didn't make sense. Still, I stared at him through the glass panes, and without thinking, I blurted out, "Santa isn't real, and even if he was, he doesn't give Jews presents." For a second, he looked caught off guard, but then he leaned closer, his voice warm and convincing. "Of course I'm real," he said. "You're right, I used to only visit Christian homes. But lately I've been feeling bad that Jewish kids never get any presents. So this year, I changed the rules just for you." His explanation sounded rehearsed, too smooth. I didn't buy it. Instead, my 7-year-old self got mad. "Jewish kids do get presents," I argued, my small hands on my hips. "We get them during Hanukkah, not on Christmas." Hanukkah wasn't just about presents for us. It was about the menorah, the spinning dreidel, and the smell of latkes sizzling in the kitchen. Each of the 8 nights brought its own small celebration, with the lighting of a candle, blessings, and the retelling of the story of how a tiny bit of oil lasted 8 miraculous days in the ancient temple. As a kid, I'd always felt pride in knowing that our holiday wasn't about one big day of gifts, but about resilience, miracles, and tradition stretched across more than a week. But as I stood there, defending Hanukkah to this stranger in a Santa suit, his smile faded instantly. All the fake jolliness drained from his face like a light switch had been flipped. His voice dropped, sharper and more commanding now. "Open the door," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Open it. Now." I told my sister to dial 911, and the man seemed to run off. For a brief moment, we felt relieved. Maybe he was gone for good. We did call the cops, but to our dismay, the operator didn't seem to understand the seriousness of what we were saying. Looking back, I think she assumed we were just little kids playing a prank, or getting overly excited about a man dressed as Santa coming to our house. Instead of helping, she scolded us, saying the emergency line was only for real emergencies, and then she hung up on us. Panic began to set in. My sister and I didn't know who else to call. At just 4 and 7 years old, the only numbers we knew were our home phone and 911. This was the 90s, so our dad didn't have a cell phone, and we didn't know how to reach him at the hospital where he was working that night. Our mom? She was impossible to wake up as usual. It was just the 2 of us, and we were on our own. We told ourselves the man wouldn't come back. Maybe he got scared off when we said we were calling the cops. But only a few minutes later, there it was again, a knock at the door. His voice followed, muffled but still chilling. "I know the cops aren't coming. You better open this door or you're going to be in big trouble." My sister, now trembling and crying, ran upstairs in a desperate attempt to wake our mom. She didn't know what else to do, and honestly, neither did I. Standing frozen by the door, my heart raced as I stared at the frosted glass panes, his shadow still looming on the other side. I did the one thing that made perfect sense to my 7-year-old brain at the time. I grabbed a bunch of candles from our menorah, lit them all, and ran to the smoke detector. My plan? To create enough smoke to set off the fire alarm. With all the urgency of a kid in a panic, I quickly blew out the candles and waved them wildly under the smoke detector. Thankfully, it worked. The alarm blared to life, piercing through the tense silence in the house. Looking back as an adult, I realize how reckless and downright dangerous this was. I'm lucky I didn't accidentally set the house on fire, but in that moment, all I cared about was getting help. In my young mind, I thought the smoke alarm was directly connected to 911 and would automatically send someone to save us. Thankfully, there was a fire station just a couple of minutes away, and sure enough, help arrived fast. My sister came running downstairs, terrified by the fire alarm, her little face pale and tear-streaked. I quickly told her there wasn't a fire and begged her to stay inside with me. "Don't open the door," I whispered urgently, clutching her hand. To my disbelief, the man outside still didn't leave. Instead, as soon as the firefighters arrived, he ran straight to them, waving like he was relieved to see them. I watched, dumbfounded, as he boldly claimed to be our dad, dressed up as Santa Claus to surprise us for Christmas Eve. Even at 7, I knew something wasn't right. The audacity of it, this stranger in a Santa suit, spinning lies while we stood helpless inside, was more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. The man outside spun a story so convincing, it left me frozen in disbelief. He explained to the firefighters that his Santa suit didn't have pockets for his keys, and because the door was locked, he couldn't get in to save us from the fire. He begged them, practically pleading, to break down the door. To my horror, the firefighters seemed to believe him. One of them was already stepping forward, about to swing the tool that would shatter the door. My sister and I erupted into a panic, crying and screaming as loudly as we could. "He's not our dad!" we shouted through the door. "Our dad is working at the hospital. We don't even know this guy. We don't celebrate Christmas." The firefighter stopped mid-swing, looking back at us with confusion. For a moment, everything felt like it hung in the balance. Finally, he turned toward the door and asked, "You don't celebrate Christmas?" "No," I cried, desperation pouring out of me. I pointed to my kippah on my head, the symbol of our faith, and then gestured to the menorah sitting proudly in the window. Tears streamed down my face as I blurted out the whole story. How I set off the smoke alarm to get help because the police didn't believe us, and how this man outside was lying. "Please," I begged, "don't let him in." The firefighter's expression softened as he listened, and to my immense relief, he believed me. He turned to the man in the Santa suit and asked, his tone sharp now, "Why would Santa show up to a Jewish home?" I can't remember exactly what the man said to try to defend himself, but whatever it was, the firefighters weren't buying it. Two of them quickly pinned him to the ground while another radioed for the police. In the midst of the chaos, they also asked us which hospital our dad worked at so they could let him know what had happened. Within minutes, the police arrived, cuffed the man, and escorted him out of our yard. One officer stayed behind with us, waiting until our dad got home so he could explain everything. When my dad finally arrived, he was livid, not just with the situation but with our mom who had slept through the entire ordeal. He tore into her for being so drunk that she couldn't be there for us when we needed her most. But above all, he was relieved and grateful that we were okay. The following Christmas, I was more than happy to go back to our usual quiet and uneventful routine. No strange men at the door, no police or fire trucks. Just us, keeping to ourselves like always. To this day, I genuinely believe being Jewish saved my sisters and my life that night. If we'd opened that door and let Santa in, there's a good chance it would have been our last Christmas, and I don't even want to think about how differently it could have ended. It was December 2022, and my girlfriend Charlotte and I were on our way to the Pocono Mountains for a getaway we'd been looking forward to for weeks. We'd rented a cozy-looking Airbnb that practically screamed Christmas cheer, decked out with holiday decorations. The location couldn't have been better, tucked away on a sprawling property with gorgeous views, yet close enough to a charming little village to feel connected. Adding to the magic of the trip, a snowstorm was forecasted to hit that night, making everything feel like it was straight out of a holiday movie. Wanting to beat the storm and settle in before it got bad, we hit the road early. The drive from the city to the Poconos was about 4 hours, and we made pretty good time. Along the way, we stopped at a Family Dollar to grab some snacks and groceries. Nothing fancy, just enough to keep us stocked for a cozy night in. From there, we drove straight to the Airbnb, turning onto a narrow uphill gravel road that cut through a clearing in the trees and led us to the property. The house was picture perfect, surrounded by dense woods that gave it an isolated yet peaceful feel. A large deck wrapped around the front, complete with a hot tub that practically begged to be used during the snowstorm. Holiday decorations filled the yard, light-up reindeer scattered across the snow, a cheerful-looking snowman, and giant candy canes lining the walkway up to the front deck. It felt like we'd stepped into our own little winter wonderland, and the anticipation of the night ahead made everything seem even more magical. We made a few trips back and forth from the car to bring everything inside. Right away, the place felt just as cozy as we had hoped. The pictures online didn't lie. It was like stepping into a holiday postcard. A Christmas tree stood proudly in one corner, stockings were hung neatly on the walls, and smaller festive decorations were scattered throughout. The warm, welcoming scent of wood filled the air, the kind you'd expect in a classic log cabin, though the house itself was more of a modern build. It didn't take long to figure out why the house smelled like that. In the living room, there was a big fireplace surrounded by a neat stack of logs, practically begging to be lit. The house had 3 bedrooms, though we only needed 1. We set our luggage in the second bedroom and started settling in. Like always, I did my usual routine, checked the fridge, flipped on the TV to see if it had cable or Netflix, and wandered to the windows to take in the view. The upstairs was more of an open loft, complete with a pool table and a couple of inviting couches. But what caught my attention was the basement. Out of sheer curiosity, I decided to check it out. It was surprisingly large compared to the rest of the house, but something about it felt off. Unlike the rest of the Airbnb, which was festive and inviting, the basement felt cold, bare, and strangely disconnected. It wasn't furnished for hanging out or relaxation. It felt more like a forgotten storage space than part of the cozy retreat we'd rented. The basement was dark, cold, and far from inviting. It felt less like a part of the cozy getaway upstairs and more like a space meant for laundry or tools. A functional workspace rather than somewhere you'd want to linger. I was about to head back upstairs when I heard a knock at the front door. Curious and slightly startled, I hurried up to answer it. Standing on the snowy porch was a man who looked to be in his late 40s. He was dressed in gray sweatpants and a tattered yellowish-brown jacket that seemed far too thin for the weather. Despite his worn appearance, he smiled warmly at me and said, "How are you folks doing?" Caught off guard, I replied, "Good," and asked if he was the Airbnb host. He nodded and explained that he and his brother ran the place together. When I asked for his name, he said it was Tom. Then, almost casually, he added that he lived just up the road and was right next door if my girlfriend and I needed anything. I thanked him, and he walked off into the snowy darkness. As I closed the door, something nagged at me. Charlotte hadn't come to the door and Tom hadn't seen her, so how did he know I was with my girlfriend? I reasoned that his brother, Mike, the actual host, must have told him. After all, I'd mentioned in my conversation with Mike that it was a festive getaway for just the two of us. Still, the way Tom had said it stuck with me, like he knew more than he should. Outside, it was pitch black, with snow falling steadily. Back inside, we cranked up the heat, the chill from the basement and the encounter still lingering in my mind. Trying to shake it off, we started preparing dinner. Chicken thighs, broccoli, potatoes, and cornbread. The smell of the food and the warmth of the kitchen helped distract me, but something about the night felt off, like the house wasn't as isolated as we thought. Dinner was a bit of a random assortment, but it hit the spot. We ate on the couch, the glow of the Christmas tree lights in the corner giving the room a cozy, festive feel. The Polar Express played on the TV. It was the only decent Christmas movie we could find on any of the streaming platforms. If it's not already obvious, we really love Christmas. After the movie ended and we felt like we'd digested enough, we decided it was time to head out to the deck and enjoy the hot tub. Before hopping in, I turned on all the decorations and Christmas lights in the yard. Sitting in the warm, bubbling water, watching the snow fall softly around us, everything felt like absolute bliss. It was like the perfect holiday postcard. Until the bubbles stopped, the tub went silent and we heard unmistakable footsteps crunching through the snow somewhere on the property. Charlotte and I exchanged nervous glances. I whispered, asking if I should call out, "Who's there?" She shook her head quickly, her eyes wide. The footsteps moved further and further away until they disappeared into the snowy silence. I forced a smile and told her it was probably just a deer, but deep down I knew better. Those were the deliberate, heavy footsteps of a person. After our unsettling soak, we decided to shower before bed. But something wasn't right. The hot water lasted barely 2 minutes before it turned ice cold, sending us both screaming as we jumped out of the shower. Shivering, I messaged Mike, the host, explaining what had happened. To his credit, he responded within half an hour saying it was odd and promising to send someone to check the hot water heater in the morning. Still feeling uneasy, we climbed into bed after our less than refreshing half shower. But any hope of a peaceful night was shattered when we were jolted awake by loud, aggressive banging on the front door. The sound echoed through the house, and in that moment, all the festive warmth of the evening drained away, replaced by a growing sense of dread. Charlotte was shaking me awake, her voice trembling with fear. "Someone's at the door," she whispered, her eyes wide. My instinct was to say, "I'm going to check." But before I could even move, she grabbed my arm tightly and demanded, "Stay in bed. Don't make a sound." Honestly, I was relieved she said that because no part of me wanted to find out who was banging on the door in the middle of the night. The banging wasn't subtle. It was loud, deliberate, and angry, like someone was trying to break the door down. I think there were 3 distinct sets of knocks, each more aggressive than the last. We sat upright in bed for what felt like forever, whispering nervously to each other in the dark. After a while, I got up and locked the bedroom door, more for a false sense of security than anything else. Minutes felt like hours, but eventually, after about half an hour of tense silence, we drifted back into an uneasy sleep. The first thing I did in the morning was message Mike, the host, about the late-night knocks. This time, he responded quickly, but his reply didn't exactly put me at ease. He seemed genuinely confused, replying with something along the lines of, "That's really strange. I have no idea why anyone would be roaming around that late at night." He added that if it happened again, we should alert the authorities. While I knew he was right, what else could he realistically say? His response wasn't exactly comforting. What was I expecting? For him to tell me to grab a gun and defend the place? Still, I couldn't help but feel like I was being that guest, the one who complains constantly. But come on, these were valid concerns, right? Outside, The snowfall from the night before had blanketed the ground. The sky was dark and heavy with clouds, and light flurries continued to fall, adding to the already thick layer of snow. The peaceful scene outside stood in stark contrast to the unsettling events of the night before, and I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that the worst might not be over. That morning I stepped outside to wipe the snow off my Jeep. The air was sharp and cold, and the snow crunched beneath my boots. As I worked, something caught my eye. Footprints in the fresh snow. They looped all the way around the house. I froze for a moment, remembering the knocks from the night before. Could these prints be from the same person? But then I realized something. It had snowed all night. Any prints from last night would have been filled in by now. These were fresh. Before I could think too much about it, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned quickly and saw Tom approaching, coming from around the side of my car. His sudden appearance startled me, but I managed to keep my composure. I told him about the hot water heater issue and that Mike had mentioned someone was coming to take a look. Tom nodded and said he knew. He was here to fix it. Relieved, but still uneasy, I decided to tell him about the knocks at the door and the footprints I'd just found in the snow. I even pointed them out to him. Tom glanced at the tracks and shrugged, saying, "There's a lot of strange folk around here who like to snoop at night." His response didn't exactly reassure me. I asked if we should avoid using the hot tub at night just to be safe. He shook his head. "Nah," he said casually. "The people around here are harmless." With that, Tom headed inside the house. He walked around for a bit, his footsteps echoing through the rooms, before heading down to the basement. He said he'd take a look at the hot water heater. Something about him felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this guy was a little strange. As he disappeared into the basement, I decided to message Mike for an update. I sent, "Tom's here now, checking out the water heater." His reply came back quickly. "Is Tom the plumber?" My stomach sank. I replied, "No, your brother." There was a long pause before his next message came through. "What do you mean he said he's my brother?" That's when it started to click in my head. Something was very, very wrong. I messaged Mike, trying to keep my cool, and asked, "Do you have a brother named Tom who helps you run this Airbnb?" His response came back quickly. "No. Who is this person?" My stomach dropped. Without hesitation, I hurried to Charlotte and whispered urgently, "Pack your things, quietly. We need to get out of here." Adrenaline coursing through us, we packed everything as quickly as possible, throwing our belongings into bags without caring about organization. I'm sure we left behind something small, a charger maybe, but none of that mattered. We grabbed everything in one trip and rushed to the car. As soon as we got inside, I started the engine, but as I glanced in the rearview mirror, my heart nearly stopped. There he was, Tom, quickly approaching the back of the Jeep. I didn't wait to see what he wanted. I threw the car into drive and sped out of there as fast as I could, my tires crunching over the snow. Once we were back on the road, my hands shaking on the wheel, we called Mike to explain everything. "You need to call the police," I told him firmly. Mike sounded alarmed but calm, promising to handle it. He didn't stay on the line for long. About 20 minutes later, as we were still driving aimlessly to calm our nerves, Mike called us back. He said the police were already at the house, but they hadn't found anyone there. He was on his way to the property himself, but wanted more details about what had happened. We relayed everything as best we could, though the unease in my chest only grew. After a few hours of aimless driving, trying to process what had just happened, we decided to head home. Later that night, Mike messaged me again, apologizing profusely and updating me. He said the police hadn't found anything suspicious and that he didn't know anyone who matched my description of Tom. That was the part that disturbed me the most. This man had been watching us the entire time, from the moment we arrived to when we were in the hot tub, and he was likely the one banging on the front door in the middle of the night. What were his intentions? I don't even want to imagine. All I know is we got out just in time.